This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Episodes coming at you 3 times a week in the season, off season, about 2 times a week. So make sure to stay dialed into what we got going on. Mark Randy, Evan Giddings. Follow us on social, everything at 415ers. Okay, Mark. So we talked about it at the beginning of the episode, teased it a little bit. There was a 49ers player, Brandon Aiyuk, who was on with Brad Graham and his podcast, joined his live stream, I believe, and was essentially, they were tossing around different ideas. And Brandon Aiyuk was asked about, I think the beginning of the conversation was asked about who he thought was going to win the Super Bowl. And Thursday's episode will dig in deeper as to who we believe is going to come out on top and the ramifications of it and all the different angles that concern Philadelphia, Kansas City, and how it impacts the 49ers. But Brandon Aiyuk essentially said, hey, like if I was a betting man, which he's not, and multiple times emphasized is not, that he would bet on the Chiefs. And whether we disagree or not, the reasoning behind it was he felt like before Brock Purdy got hurt, that the offense had some things that they felt like were going to work against this Eagles defense. And the extension of that basically was like, if San Francisco can, quote unquote, figure out or expose whatever keyword you want to use this Eagles, near historic level defense, then why can't Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce do it on the other side? That's kind of how I took it. I didn't take it as a slight. And he did preface his comments by saying, hey, I'm the one sitting on the couch. Like, I'm not in the Super Bowl. And it may come off as salty, essentially, but here's how I feel. So I did appreciate him being realistic about the situation, as well as also being able to give his opinion, because now we can talk about it.
Well, yeah, here's the quote. You're right. He did preface it. So if you're reading this on, whatever website, they're probably not including his preface. So you're getting a more spicy version of it. But here is the quote that caught on Twitter. They talk about them being a good defense. He's talking about Philadelphia. I'm not too sure. I think this Kansas City pass game will expose what we thought we were going to be able to expose before some unfortunate circumstances. We'll see. But like I said, you got to get lucky to win a Super Bowl, and they just got extremely lucky last week. So that by itself, Evan, sounds a lot like, I don't know, sour grapes. It sounds pretty bad, but you're right. He did preface it. He also, said after the fact similar things like I'm not taking anything away from them, that sort of thing. But in that quote alone, it sounds an awful lot like you're taking some things away from the Philadelphia Eagles. Brandon Aiyuk, you probably shouldn't be saying that sort of stuff, but whatever. I mean, it doesn't really mean all that much. But I think it just speaks to the confidence that the Niners had going into that game, Evan, and something that we talked about for a number of episodes last week. It's a shame that we didn't get to see this matchup because I think it really would have been extremely competitive. But the Niners, assuming that Brock Purdy didn't get hurt, they would have been right there. And Brandon Aiyuk feels that way. I'm sure most of the team feels that way. Just the difference is Brandon Aiyuk is the one that spoke on it publicly while no one else has. So I don't know. It probably doesn't mean all that much. The Eagles probably enjoy hearing that sort of thing. Not that they need extra motivation, but it probably makes them feel, I don't know, a little more motivated, a little more happy about beating the 49ers. But in the big picture, it probably doesn't mean all that much.
No, I think it does, Mark, because this is what we know, not from a perspective of like predictions or what would have happened or revisionist history. But I do want Brandon Aiyuk to say stuff like this. Like, I do want to hear what athletes really feel about the situations that unfold, because whether it's unfair or we got cheated, like that's seemingly the same way that the team felt. And yes, logic would tell you that's how they should feel, but hearing it from them and also hearing the type of confidence from Brandon Aiyuk tells me that like this 49ers team thought that they were that close to winning a Super Bowl. And it is also how we felt too. Now, the other part of it, Mark, is if he is saying that, he thought they had some stuff for Philly and whether or not he thought they would expose them or not, that's also not exactly, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when we were talking about the game after and reacting to the NFC Championship, you said something along the lines of, I felt like with Brock Purdy in that game, the 49ers would or could have won that football game.
Yes.
Like that
Yes, I
to
do.
me is what I hear Brandon Aiyuk saying when he's saying, yes, we're gonna expose blah blah blah, defense different, yes. But like that's essentially what I hear, which is also what I heard from yourself along with a lot of 49ers fans. So I think it is valuable hearing that from someone like him.
Sure, and I am very sure that most people in the locker room feel the same way. The difference is I can say it, and a player on the team shouldn't say it publicly.
Why
Uh,
not?
I guarantee you, Brandon, you got a call from
He
Peter.
precursed like everything that he could. Like if
I
you
ge-
listen to the
I
full 3-minute clip,
I
it does not sound
guarantee
as
you.
bad as that.
I guarantee you. After he said this, and after Peter at Niners PR heard it, he gave Brandon Aiyuk a quick call and say, "Hey, Brandon,
What's he
come on, man.
saying?
You
What did he
can't,
say that was wrong?
you can't say that
Why not?
publicly because it's
Because you're going to
it,
give Philadelphia bulletin board material for next year? No, like I want to hear what a player that was in the locker room that saw two quarterbacks go down felt on that day, and he only had 2 catches.
I agree with you. I want to hear it too. Me personally, I love hearing this sort of thing. I love actually hearing what players and people in professional sports organizations feel because it's so rare that they just simply speak honestly. How often do we talk about what Kyle Shanahan says? We just got done talking about it. How he's not telling the media what he truly thinks or feels. Everything that comes out of Kyle Shanahan's mouth to the media in a public setting is veiled in some way with a lie. Like it's just the way that coaches speak. It's the way that professional sports organizations go about their media duties. So hearing something like this and hearing a player actually speak honest is refreshing. I enjoy it. But I guarantee you the team does not like it because they simply do not like these sorts of things being out there in the public. It's not the worst thing. Again, if it was if the Niners were going up in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs, and Aiyuk said, "Yeah, that time the Chiefs beat us way back in October, no big deal. Like that was just a bag. We got him this. Like that would be way worse, of course, because it's an upcoming opponent that you're playing in a gigantic game. But even this, it's something the teams want to avoid. It doesn't. It's not the greatest picture of your organization, despite the fact that it's really not that big of a deal. But I guarantee you that Niners PR called up Aiyuk after they first saw this and tried to explain that to him. But I'm with you from a selfish position, Evan. I enjoy hearing it. I like to know what the players, what the team is actually thinking because we rarely get an honest look inside of their thoughts. And Aiyuk did offer that to us. So I am glad it happened. The team, however, I'm sure is not.
But even if, like, okay, I'll give you that. 49ers PR calls him and says, "Hey, Brandon, what are you doing?" On a scale of 1 to 10, how incendiary were his comments? Because
Uh,
I would argue they're like a 2.
I'd probably say like a 5.
Really? Because
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many worse things. Like if you really wanted to go down that road of what you thought about Philly or your situation or others, like he could have thrown gasoline on some stuff inside of the 49. Again, it was not about what San Francisco was doing. It was more about, to me, what I heard about Philadelphia and why, again, he's trying to um, essentially support why he thinks that Kansas City's going to win the Super Bowl, which also I'm not surprised to hear because Kansas City literally trashed the 49ers at their own building. So they have a firsthand experience against a team that's in the Super Bowl on one side that beat them at full strength, and the other team that, of course, just beat them, which may sound like sour grapes. But I also think that Aiyuk is saying, look, we felt closer to Philadelphia than we did to Kansas City.
Yeah, you're right. There are worse things he could have said. He could have talked about the scrum at the end of the game and maybe said some disparaging things. I know fines came out this past week. Guess what? Trent Williams was not the most heavily fined player from that NFC Championship game. The Eagles' Brandon Graham was docked over $13,000 for unsportsmanlike conduct. I'll have to go back and rewatch the scrum at the end, Evan, but I do not think Brandon Graham was all that involved. I don't even know what he got fined for.
He
It's
was
officially
in the middle of it, but It sounds like it was probably more due to comments than
Perhaps.
actual physical action.
Yeah, so he got fined over 13,000. Trent Williams was fined over 12,000. Dre Greenlaw 10,000 as well. Of course, you remember him trying to punch the ball out of Kenneth Gainwell multiple times after the play was already over. So Trent Williams not the most fined player there. It is Brandon Graham, but you're right. Brandon Aiyuk could have said some more incendiary things for sure. But again, these professional sports organizations don't like airing of grievances in a public setting that way. And I know it was not even necessarily grievances. He was just talking, it's unfortunate we had this plan. We were hoping we could do these things. Now I think Kansas City will do those things. But unfortunately, as you know this, Evan, uh, you're in a you're a I don't know, a professional athlete. You are in the public's eye. You're held to a higher standard than everyone else. It's just the way it is. But again, speaking selfishly, I like hearing these things because it's rare you get to peek inside how a team is actually feeling. You oftentimes have to guess, try to figure it out. But now we know for sure how the Niners felt. Not that there was really much of a question, but I'm sure the Niners would like to keep all those things internal if they possibly could, which is never going to happen because these are emotional athletes who obviously play an extremely physical game and who are very confident in themselves and they like to back it up with their talk as well. So I'm not surprised that we got something like this. I am glad we did because it's nice to hear. But I guarantee you the Niners were not the most thrilled about it when they heard about it.
Oh, sure. I just thought it was interesting too, and to hear your response because honestly, I disagree with Brandon Aiyuk. Like, I don't think they would have exposed the Philadelphia Eagles defense. We'll never know. But it was just interesting to hear how you, I guess, broke that down from your side because I felt like you were more on like the Brandon Aiyuk train in this conversation.
I
Uh, yeah.
I think the word expose is the toughest one here. I think this Kansas City pass game will expose what we thought we were going to be able to expose before some unfortunate circumstances. The other part here is you read between the lines, and I know he's not, but it's almost like he's comparing Patrick Mahomes to Brock Purdy. The
When
Kansas
he
City
talks
pass
about all of this, I swear it does not sound as bad. Like, I encourage you to go watch the video, please. It does not sound as bad.
I think if he used a word other than expose, it wouldn't be as bad. Say he says, I think this Kansas City pass game will be able to take advantage of some things that we were hoping to before our quarterback got hurt. That's not
Yeah.
nearly as big of a deal. And ultimately, it's the same sentiment, Evan, but it just comes down to word choice and semantics, which is what this entire argument or conversation is about in the first place. So I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. But again, the Niners wouldn't want it in general. But I'm with you. You should go and watch it. It's sort of there's so many stories about this. You just search Brandon Aiyuk, and there's probably 10 or 15 articles that pop up, and they all have just this quote pulled from it. And they don't have any of the other context, which I'm sure Brandon Aiyuk is frustrated about as well, as he should be, because that's just the way that the world works now. Try to get as many clicks as he can by being as controversial as he can. And there's a reason why this has stood out, Evan, is because it is pretty rare to hear these kind of public comments from a player. If it wasn't as big of a deal, or if it at least was a little more common, it wouldn't have caught on and been as big of a story in Niners Twitter as it has been. So I'm with you. It's probably ultimately not that big of a deal, but it is relatively rare to get these kind of comments.
Yeah, which is why I would encourage Brandon Aiyuk to keep saying what he wants to say, and so we can continue to talk about it, and so we
I'm
can
with that.
continue to learn more about players that I enjoy covering and watching as a sports fan, as someone who covers the 49ers on the 415ers. So that's going to wrap up this episode. We'll have another one coming for you this week on Thursday, always, of course, on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Mark, thank you so much, my man. We'll talk later in the week.
Yes, we'll probably talk some defensive coordinator on Thursday because the Niners still have an opening there. That's probably goal number one before they figure out their quarterback stuff this offseason. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, we'll have some news by then as well. TBD. Kyle Shanahan, I'm sure, has thought about that. We will we will talk to you next time. Appreciate everyone listening to the 415ers podcast. We'll talk to you next time.